Hey YouTube, Kira Qualia here, bringing you all my Cardfight Vanguard Overdress, Baromagnes, Dark States deck profile for Post, A Brush with the Legends. With the latest Cardfight Vanguard booster set, we were given more support for the, I would say, second Dark States deck, with Bruce being the first, Baromagnes. This deck focuses more on the playstyle of Dark Irregulars and Pale Moon, I would say, from the original decks that focused on the soul buildup. And that's really what you get with Baromagnes, just a bunch of cards building up in the soul and then gaining additional card abilities based on your units and how many cards you have in the soul, and being able to mess with your own opponent's field if you reach the perfect amount of cards in your soul with Baromagnes. And the new support from A Brush with the Legends just helps to better that play style altogether. So let's go ahead and get started with the deck profile. So for the ride deck, our starter and basically the whole ride deck is still the same. We're still running Uncanny Bernie as our go-to card. When this card is rode upon, if you went second, draw a card, with our grade 1 being Deep Sonicer. When this unit is placed on Vanguard, you soul charge 1, and on rearguard during your turn, if your soul has 10 or more cards, this unit gets plus 10,000 power, which you can easily call this card out from the soul with Baromagnes. Our grade 2 unit being Electro Spartan. This is more of a setup card again, once again, when this unit is rode upon by Master of Gravity, Baromagnes. Put a card from your hand into your soul, draw a card, and then soul charge 1. And when this unit is placed on rear, counterblast 1 and soul charge 3. So you have the easy buildup of soul, but also a little bit more draw power with this card on the Vanguard circle, with our main go-to grade 3 being Master of Gravity, Baromagnes himself, for the ride deck. Along with the card in the ride deck, we are also running 3 additional copies of the card in the actual main deck. On Vanguard, when this unit attacks, counterblast 1 and perform all the following according to the number of cards in your soul. If you have 5 or more, you draw a card. 10 or more, this unit gets plus 10,000 in extra critical until end of battle. And 15 or more, both you and your opponent put all of your own rear guards into your souls. Choose up to 2 cards from your soul, call them to rear, and then those units get plus 10,000 power until end of turn. So being able to select the cards you call out can definitely change up your playstyle. Being able to call out cards like Deep Sonicer gives you the plus 10 from its own card ability, but also from Baromagnes itself, and then just additional build up if you Persona Road that turn. So you can hit some pretty big numbers with all your cards on the field, and the overall pressure of Baromagnes having an additional critical and power, and the fact that you can disrupt your opponent's field if they have a full field. It will give them soul power, but they'll lose a lot of units on the field that could have probably bettered them than just having a lot of soul to build up with Soul Blast skills. And then for the other grade 3 we run in the deck, still hasn't changed, but 3 of the Phantasma Magician Curtis. When this unit is placed on rear, if your Vanguard is Master of Gravity, Baromagnes, you soul charge 2. So with this card and having the soul charge ability on rear guard, it's a good build-up card once again. And on rear, if your soul has 10 or more cards, you counterblast 2, and all of your front row get plus 5,000 to end of turn. I don't normally use this skill as much. You want to save it mostly for the setup for Baromagnes, so you always have that counterblast. But you do have some other countercharging cards in the deck, including our first of the grade 2s, which we are running, which is 4 of the Selfish Engraver. When this unit attacks, hits, you soul charge 1. So you have that pressure because it doesn't even have to hit the Vanguard circle. It can even just attack into a rear guard, and you can hit some pretty big numbers once again when you Persona Ride with this card. And at the end of the battle that this unit attacked, if your soul has 10 or more cards, put this unit into your soul and countercharge 1. So not only can you call this card out with Baromagnes, you can also protect it by putting it back into the soul, giving you counter charges for all the counter blasts that you may use up with your units on the field, being able to then call them back out again next turn with Baromagnes, being able to attack, putting all the units in the soul, and then calling out 2 cards for you to attack, getting multiple attacks off in one turn as well because of Baromagnes. For the newer support that we are running in the deck, I am running 3 of the new Crimson Expeller. On rearguard, when this unit attacks, you soul charge 1. So all it has to do is attack a Vanguard, and you soul charge 1. And from the soul, you can counterblast 1, put this unit into your drop zone, soul charge 1, choose one of your Vanguards, and gets plus 10,000 to end of turn. So you basically don't lose out in any of the soul with this card. Being able to give your Vanguard that plus power can just be additional numbers you need with Baromagnes to go up against your opponent. I saw some numbers with this card boost enough to where your opponent would guard even with an over trigger, and the amount of drive checks you perform with Baromagnes could still potentially hit into the Vanguard unless they drop down more to additionally guard with that card, making them basically wanting to drop the Sentinel down for the Vanguard attack, just with the immense number pressure you can do with this card. And once again, it doesn't really take away from your soul because you soul charge after you use it. If you call this card out early game, you can also build up more of that soul. I've thought of running 4 of this card, but you have more of the counter charge power with Selfish Engraver. That's why I kept this card and the next grade 2 at their allotted numbers. But if you wanted to raise the number of Crimson Expeller at all, you can reduce either one of those grade 2 spots to an additional copy of this card, being player preference at that point. And then the last of the grade 2s, running 3 more Electro Spartan, having the 1 in the ride deck. This is just in here for the additional one placed on rear, Counterblast 1, and Soul Charge 2. So you just have early game Soul Charge pressure with this card, just needing the Counterblast, which once again, it can be eaten up pretty quickly, but you also have the possibility of you healing that early game damage. So if you use it early game, you don't have as much of a risk with this card. Just make sure you always have those Counterblasts to use with Baromagnes, since it is your main go-to setup card in the deck as a whole. And that is it for the grade 2s. Moving on now to the grade 1s, running 3 Freeze Breeze on rear when this unit attack boosted. If your Vanguard is Master of Gravity Baromagnes, you Soul Charge 1. If your Soul has 10 or more cards, you can Counterblast 1 and draw 2 cards. So this is more for the hand power in the deck. You can definitely invest a lot into your Soul and your field with your hand, so you need that number to basically defend against your opponent, and that's where Freeze Breeze comes in. Just where the attack it boosted, if your Vanguard is Master of Gravity Baromagnes, you have that pressure, so it has to hit when it boosts, but you still have that option with the Vanguard attack and your incoming rearguard attacks against your opponent to potentially hit and give you this draw power, and just more incentive for your opponent to want to guard this attack altogether. And then the last of the grade 1 for more of the attack units, I run 1 additional Deep Sonicer. I only run 1 additional one of this card. You really only need the 2 because your main go-to play will be with Baromagnes on your Vanguard. And you should, hopefully, with most games, be able to at least hit the card for you to place into the soul with this card, meaning then you can call them both out to the field with Baromagnes, and then either your opponent will attack into them next turn or go for the Baromagnes play, so then when you attack again, you can just place them back into the soul and call them out again. You really only need the 2 though, because there's a better chance that you will at least soul charge the 1 early game. If not, you still have the 1 in your soul to use for calling out, and then maybe calling out another unit like Selfish Engraver for more counter charge build up. With the last of the Sentinel being for more of the defensive play with this one. For that last grade 1 spot, I run the 4 Recusal Hate Dragon just for the initial Sentinel protection against your opponent. If you have the 2 cards in hand, being able to guard with the 1 Sentinel, keeping the 1 in the hand. Since you have 1 or less cards in your hand, you don't have to discard for the cost of 1. Very, very useful for when you need to block a Vanguard attack for the risk of the potential over trigger. And then if you block that attack and your opponent still tries to attack into you with a rear guard with the 100 million power, you have that final Sentinel to guard against that attack, especially if that rear guard has an additional critical and you're at 4 damage or more. And also now moving on to the normal orders, I am running 3 of the Brother's Soul. Remember, you can only run 1 normal order a turn, but this card just basically lets you soul charge 2. So if you get these into your hand early game, you can build up the soul that much more quickly. It doesn't need any counterblast or anything like that. You just have to have the grade 1 ride target, and then you can soul charge 1. And then if you open up another one next turn, another additional soul charge. With the new normal order being the Supernatural Extraction. This is more of a power card. You play this card with the Counterblast 1, discard a card from your hand. You soul charge 3. Then if your soul has 10 or more cards, choose a card from your soul and you may put it into your hand. So this is the best way to get additional cards back into your hand that would have better use in your hand, obviously being the Sentinel, while also being able to build up your soul. And that's why cards like Freeze Breeze come in handy, because you need that draw power to invest into some of these normal orders like this that go for more of the pressure for building up your soul and then recycling cards back into your hand for you to use. And that's it for the normal orders. Moving on now to the trigger lineup. Decided to go with the 7 criticals. So the 4 Diablos Girls My and the 3 Flinty Slasher. This is just preference. This is actually my buddy Jim's deck that he let me borrow for the deck profile. So he's a much bigger fan of the Bruce trigger lineup. That's why he decided to run it in this deck as well. But honestly, it's just player preference. Just the 7 critical for that additional pressure with Baromagnes. If your opponent no guards the Baromagnes attack, attack, and you gain an additional critical. That's 3 damage right there, so it can definitely be the game-winning play, depending on how much damage your opponent was at. With the last trigger spot for the slots being for Diablos Girls Natalia, this is the new front trigger with the +5 additional shield if your opponent's at a grade 3. So that additional 20,000 shield can definitely come in handy against 28k attacks if your Vanguard's at 13k, putting you at 33k shield to block against those and only having to use 1 card. And lastly, the 4 heal trigger, once again, just his player preference for the heal trigger in the deck being the Diablos Girls Ariana for the heal trigger spot. And lastly, the over trigger being the Hades Dragon Deity of Resentment. This one can honestly be the vanilla over trigger that gives the 100 million power. It's player preference once again. This has great early game pressure, while the other one can provide the 100 million to both of your rear guards if your opponent blocks the Baromagnes attack. Having both of those units gain 100 million power off of the drive check is one of your main go-to reasons to run that additional over trigger in the deck. But once again, if you have the card, play it. If not, you can go for either one and see which one you prefer to play more in the deck altogether. But that is it for the deck profile. I hope you all enjoyed. As always, thanks again to my buddy Jim for letting me borrow the deck for the deck profile, and still working on a lot of different deck updates for A Brush with the Legends with the new support. And until next time, please don't forget to leave a like and subscribe, and Kira Qualia out.